We're joined by Robert Pszczel, Senior Fellow, Center for Eastern Studies. Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
My pleasure.
So let me start by asking you about Ukraine. Mr. Rutte has been known for his sort of staunch support towards Ukraine. He has even signed a deal, right, a 10-year deal with Ukraine during his last month in office. So my question is, will we see NATO policy changing, NATO policy towards Ukraine, I mean?
Well, NATO policies are decided by nations, of course, so Secretary General's role is important because so far as we have not yet had woman at the helm of NATO. Maybe it will come, it should come. But Secretary General role is important in terms of kind of steering the agenda and generating, making efforts to achieve consensus. But it's the nations, as I said, who decide. So at the moment, heading towards the summit, we can see that there is a strong momentum at this stage, with one or two exceptions like Hungary, to actually approve a long-term plan of support in which, or to be precise, implementation or coordination of military training, supplies of military arms, ammunition, and even repairs. So in some respects, by the time that the new Secretary General assumed the office in October, that will be NATO's policy, which he will have to make a lot of efforts to implement. As far as Mr. Rutte himself, one could be precise and say that he's undergone a little transformation in the last few years. Initially, he was rather cautious when the war started, but it's true. He has become a staunch supporter on the international scene, and he has led, as you mentioned, Netherlands, one of the countries to sign this so-called security assistance bilateral agreement with Ukraine. So this will be one of the most important jobs for the new Secretary General to maintain this momentum, this support. And there are some problems. We expect that some policies in nations may change due to elections. So the task may become even more challenging. But that's I think he will devote himself to this issue for sure.
Indeed. So we're talking really about the level of influence that Mr. Rutte will be able to apply to member states of NATO. Does that level of influence extend to a pathway for Ukraine and perhaps even Georgia into NATO?
Well, as far as decisions of that nature, and these are fundamental decisions to essentially issue invitations to countries to become the next member. That's, to be very frank, that's something for the Secretary General, an area in which he has to step rather gently. I mean, good example is the current Secretary General, Mr. Stoltenberg. I mean, when the issue of Sweden and Finland, its membership of those countries came up, that was the first moment that he could actually actively voice supported it, even though he was well known as leader of the Nordic countries to have very favorable views on this, because until essentially there was first of all a request, he didn't want to influence, if you like, debate in the countries in question. So that's one of the issues in which the Secretary General, from a political point of view, has to exercise diplomacy. Having said this, every time there is a decision which opens, if you like, another door or makes the process, go faster, if you like, and maybe there will be some new elements, although one is doubtful at the summit on this issue, then that leaves open for the Secretary General a door to kind of lead those efforts, to intensify it, and to make sure that whatever is agreed, in this case on Ukraine and its membership path, is implemented by the allies to kind of keep the flame. And that's a very important role, because 32 countries, that's sometimes it's called herding the cats, the process which Secretary General has to engage in.
Right. So what are some of the priorities on NATO's agenda moving forward?
Well, apart from Ukraine that we mentioned, and of course we talk about membership, but it's first of all it's NATO's support to Ukraine during this war. NATO now has a stake. It's clear it doesn't want to get involved, doesn't want to become party to the war itself, but it is. It's already made some of the strategic decisions to support Ukraine in this fight, because it's not just for Ukraine's security, but also security of de facto NATO as well, because Ukraine is defending its eastern flank of NATO, and Russia makes no bones about its desire, essentially of confrontation with the West, with NATO. Second big issue connected to this is, of course, collective defense itself, which is at the heart of NATO's, reason why NATO exists. And there are good plans. There are many decisions that have already been taken, but the big part of the portfolio is and will be, again, ensuring that allies' individual capitals make the necessary investments. This is about, the defense budgets. This is about what the money is spent. This is about making further commitments and etc. And that can translate then into specific capabilities. So there's a lot in that dossier, and this is obviously the most important part of the responsibilities and the agenda of NATO. Linked to this, there are other things which one should not forget, particularly for the countries in the south, but not only. The issue of terrorism is important. One cannot, ignore this. And then there are special, if you like, developments of relations with countries further away, maybe far away geographically, but very important already for European security, such as the countries in the Pacific, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and South Korea. So, in other words, the agenda is pretty full. And as always in life, one cannot rule out some surprises. And that's also an important part of the job of the Secretary General. He has to be, in the lead when it comes to showing the path. What are the NATO's as organization, abilities and capabilities in resolving any crisis that we have maybe not even thought about. So that's crisis management remains one of the key tasks of NATO as well.
Indeed. And you mentioned terrorism. Now, terrorism and cybersecurity are two areas which are part of NATO's brief. When we think of NATO, though, we often don't talk about those two areas. Do you see both of those, because there are enormous challenges that exist today, do you see both of those taking a higher profile in the upcoming few years?
Well, let's start with cyber defense. I mean, it's part of the so-called hybrid threats, and that is, if I can use a term, which is perhaps unfortunate, but I'm thinking quickly, I mean, it's kind of unfortunate, it's a growth area, because, a country like Russia and partially China as well, I mean, certainly Russia is now engaged in a whole, range of hybrid attacks. I mean, cyber is one element of this, but we're also dealing with issues such as, sabotage. I mean, in a country like Poland, there's been a spite of, a string of strange, because of its intensity and because of its, comprehensiveness, fires and other things. I mean, there's espionage, there's lots of other things. So cyber is involved in many of those attacks, and we need to think of those capabilities that NATO has as an organization. And there's quite a few which have been developed, but also, the fact that the bulk of the cutting edge, both technology, but also real capabilities, both defensive and offensive, reside with nations. And that's also a job how to make them available to NATO itself. Terrorism has been topping, if you like, NATO's agenda. That was the reason why NATO got involved in Afghanistan. For instance, NATO has played a big role and continues to some extent when it comes to, safety against terrorism on the seas. NATO was involved in the fight against ISIS. So one cannot exactly predict what will be the new challenges, but looking at the situation in the Red Sea, who knows? There's a huge naval battle going on, which is, which US is taking a lead role in terms of defending the commons, as they often the Caesar calls. So maybe there will be voices in the future that NATO should take a more prominent role. That's something to be seen. But again, that's what I mean by saying that this is this is NATO in the 21st century, which has to deal with the challenges as they are. I mean, and they are very different from those which existed even 30 or even 20 years ago.
Thank you, sir. Robert Pszczel, Senior Fellow, Center for Eastern Studies, was our guest. Much appreciated.